Great. POIs can be in the chat, turn on your little hand or turn on your camera and wave around, whatever, just don't interrupt me, please. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm gonna start with a little bit of framing here. I'm gonna give you the metric and what's really important within this debate, tell you why the status quo has failed and why this policy is necessary, both with efficacy and why it is justified. So starting with the framing here. First of all, this is a popular policy within El Salvador. This is not something that is like hated by the citizens. It's something that in fact has a lot of support because El Salvador has a high rate of gang violence. It has the highest murder rate in the world. It has widespread drug trade that goes internationally, a high amount of gang violence. It is simply dangerous to be a citizen of El Salvador because of the gang violence that exists within this country. That is why a crackdown is being made. So those innocent citizens who are not involved in this are simply being hurt over and over again. It's also difficult within the status quo or prior to this policy being enacted to prosecute gang members or to fully take down that organization because of the way that they operate and the way that they're able to, hide money, all of that kind of stuff, right? So that means that this is not something that can be done with traditional resources. And in fact, it has been proven to fail. Why did the status quo prior to these policies fail? A couple of reasons. The first is a lack of resources and a lack of resource allocation to this, specifically manpower. They just don't have enough people being able to patrol the streets to actually cause a deterrent to people who are committing crimes openly. The second is about police corruption. People are being paid off by the police are being paid off to ignore this. This means that the balance of power has been put into the hands of the gangs rather than the law enforcement and the state itself. And the last is that gang members are in and out of prison. Their prison sentences are likely pretty short because they're getting busted on things that are smaller crimes than what is the larger thing that is being committed. This is also true because within the current system, with the amount of police officers, or prior to these policies, the amount of police officers that were allocated to this did not have the ability to go after those, like, the really powerful gang leaders, and instead had to went for petty crimes to be able to prosecute because they had a higher certainty of prosecution and because it is less dangerous for them to do so. So that is why this status quo has failed. So what is my case here? Two things. First is on efficacy again, and the second is on why it's justified. Efficacy. This is an efficacious policy. This is something that works at reducing gang violence within El Salvador. A couple of reasons. The first is the increased resources, specifically human resources, but also a higher level of technology, simply money for being able to, do the investigations that need to be done, and a high priority being put onto these cases so that they are the most important thing within the investigations that are taking place. These human resources are necessary for these nationwide investigations, and the military itself is going to be incredibly important in this. First of all, because it is less corrupt due to less interaction with the gangs and a higher level of oversight directly from the state, a state which has now announced itself as being vehemently anti-gang. So I think that we're able to get a higher level of scrutiny when we involve a military presence. I also think that this means that you just have a higher level of manpower being able to patrol the streets and slow down people who may be openly committing crimes in public, right? The second thing here is the signaling effect, and this is an internal and an external signaling effect, both within El Salvador and to other countries, right? Gangs rely on increasing their numbers by making membership seem more appealing than the alternative, than living legally, right? And the way by increasing the amount of consequences that exist for people who are caught involved in gang activity, you are able to reduce their ability to recruit people to that level. Because if I am thinking, well, I can join this gang and maybe I'll have a little bit more money, but the consequences, I could be put in jail forever. I could face serious consequences that you probably don't get without these policies in place. Because again, the balance of power is in the hands of the gangs and not the police. I think you only get those consequences when you have this high level of crackdown that exists under these policies, right? So I think you're actually reducing their ability to recruit new members and thus their ability to replenish as they get knocked down further and further. So it makes it more likely to be able to take down gangs faster instead of just having them replaced in place, right? At the very least, yeah, it's going to be less frequent and less obvious criminal activity. I think this, even if you just take this at a very small level, though I do think it'll have a much bigger effect, this simply means fewer people getting attacked in the streets. This means fewer people being involved within gang behavior, which is incredibly dangerous. I think that you just have a better quality of life for the citizens of El Salvador at the point where you are able to reduce the blatant gang violence that exists, So the third point under this on efficacy is about the short-term crackdown and why it's particularly important that it needs to be this strong, why it needs to be this extreme, right? In a counterfactual without these measures, police just don't have the capacity to investigate, prosecute, and conduct raids at the highest level. So this policy allows for a more structural breakdown of these gangs, allowing them to use things like plea bargains to get people to give them higher names and the ability to actually find the heads of these organizations and take them down, as opposed to trying to break it away, chip it away from the bottom. That's simply not an effective method. It's been proven to not work. I think that with the resources and the manpower that exists under this policy, that is something that can be done. This policy is not permanent. This is an emergency reaction to an emergency. When we are able to reduce that rate of violence to a significant degree and make the city safer, those rules will start to relax until people are able to go back to a normal life with lower levels of gang violence, right? What are the impacts here? I think they're pretty obvious. You have a reduction of gang violence, better quality of life for citizens. This is what the metric here is. Two things on the metric is going to be the safety of innocents and the government's duty to protect its citizens. And I think both of these things are the most important thing within the debate. It's the goal of any government, especially when you're talking about law enforcement policy. You want to be able to protect people. You want to reduce the crime rate within your country. I think this is something that can only be achieved with the mechanisms that exist on a government. The second thing is this justified? And I think it absolutely is. First reason is because states have the primary duty to protect their citizens. The citizens of El Salvador are not being protected. They are being harmed by the gangs. Or in fact, their only ability outside of this policy, their only protection could come from buying into these gangs and just making the problem bigger and bigger because they have the power. But again, shifting this balance of power, I think we're able to reduce that. I think you're able to simply have a protect citizens to a much better extent. That is the point of any government. That is the point of what the leader of El Salvador is doing. And then finally, El Salvadorian gangs have international reach. They commit crimes in multiple countries. It's an international crime ring. So measures to decrease their influence would be supported by affecting neighboring countries, including countries like the US that have high levels of drugs imported within the country, something that they want to reduce. So I think these policies are going to be supported both internally and externally. For those reasons, OG. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you very much for a speech. Please give me just 2 minutes because it seems that there will be some changes on the draw that we started with the panel that was not supposed to be here, but the panel that was cannot enter the room. So I'll try to resolve this as soon as possible. Sorry for this inconvenience.
Okay. Am I both visible and audible?
Please do not start. We have a delay. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Just start.
because it seems that they swapped the panelist in the meantime. I didn't realize. My other panelist also, my previous panelist also didn't realize. So I think we can just proceed. I'm so sorry for the delay. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome the first speaker for the opposition.
Okay, just a second, set up a timer. Okay. So starting in 3, 2, 1, start. Dear panel, something missed by the opening government is why do people in generally join gangs and are part of gangs, which is very important for this debate. This is one main characterization, which is why would this policy be incredibly ineffective? And this is for the simple reason that people join gangs because they have nothing to lose at that point. This is the case because they risk things like going to prison, which will ruin their entire life, will make them unable to get any sort of job, will make them have no relatives because they're going to abandon them. So like they risk everything to be in a gang. And basically the bottom line of this is, if you're in a gang, you have literally no other choice because the consequences right now are very dire. Like going to prison is incredibly bad. So like, what are these cases that people join gangs, with which people join gangs? Like, either they're forcing you to do this by threatening that they will kill you, or threatening that they will kill your family, or you literally die from hunger or living under the line of poverty if you don't join a gang and you don't do crime in this sort of way. This means that no matter what measures introduce, they're better than no matter what measures they introduce, these people will still choose to do the crime because these measures can't be as severe as death of their whole family. So this creates no delta in this debate with the gangs in this sort of way because they never address this. But, you know, maybe you catch people and like maybe you send them to prison, which does do some sort of delta, which was one of your mechanisms. But they're incredibly easy to replace, having in mind how there are tons upon tons of people that live in poverty in these sort of countries like El Salvador, where the economy isn't that good. There are a lot of people that live in a really bad life, or they can just go ahead and threaten people. So like, it is very easy to replace them. But second point, notice, the El Salvador government is not like they don't have a lot of alternatives. They can ask for international support, for money from them. They can increase the standard of living to face all of these gangs. But notice why they did this instead of these things. They did it because it is the easiest policy. It is very easy to implement this policy. While asking for help means you have to do some sort of changes in your government to be less corrupt. While doing like poverty things means that you have to spend less money on corruption and spend more money on things like social policies. So like, they didn't do it because of necessity. They did it because it's the easiest thing. This is very important in the debate. But thirdly, they have support every single policy. This very important burden that they have is that they have to support every single policy in this sort of thing. We can say we support some of them. Their burden is to explain why every single one of them is good. We can say, okay, we support the militarization, we support more police officers, but we don't support, for example, the human rights violations that happen according to this. We can do that. They have to support every single one. They have argued only for two in their first speech. But the fourth point of framing, gangs in the status quo don't attack civilians. They attack other gangs. This is the case because they have no incentive to attack civilians. Because at the point at which they attack civilians, they're doing one more crime, which is one more crime that risks them going to prison. And secondly, attacking civilians, they can just report the government. They can just report to the government, while other gangs can't report to the government because they will be questioned, because they will be questioned that they're part of a gang, which will be incredibly bad for them. So like, bottom line, they don't even attack civilians that often, so the whole problem that they're trying to like change doesn't really happen. But okay, let's go on with our first argument, which is that there is a moral and we should not break it in this debate. Now, the moral is state power. So why does this moral exist? The country takes a lot of things from you. Like they take taxes, they can draft you for the military, they can send you to prison in those sorts of things. The country owes you the ability to control things. It should give you free speech, it should give you the right to vote, it should give you the right for attorney. They have to protect your human rights. They must do this so you have proportional control over the country. This means that things like this, why dictatorships, for example, are immoral, because this proportion is broken. So why is this moral infringed on their side of the house? This moral is broken by a lot of these policies. Like, for example, taking away human rights. This means they take away the right of assembly, which is a direct expression of freedom of speech, which means that this moral is broken because now people can't have control over what the government does by saying, okay, this isn't okay when assembling. Or the right of attorney, because the country can choose to put you on court, but they have to give you the ability to protect yourself. So this is once again proportional. If they take the right for attorney, which is one of these policies, notice how this is incredibly bad because the moral is broken. But this directly takes your right to have proportional control over the country. So on their side, this moral is broken. Why is this important? Not at the point at which the practical impacts of stopping crime isn't 100% certain, because gangs have a lot of incentives, and we prove, at least with some reason that isn't likely to happen, we should go with the most certain thing in the debate, which is the moral argument, because morals always happen in this sort of way, while practice in this particular case is incredibly uncertain because it relies on the incentives of gang and gang leaders to do stuff. But why is it a quick intuition pump here is that like you have proportional sentences for different crimes because of this moral, for example, because you shouldn't be judged that much in this sort of way. Quick POI closing, if any.
So why do you think that we haven't been able until now to make gang rates become lower?
We think that this is the case because the El Salvador government, as I have explained, are doing the laziest policy, the policy that causes the least amount of backlash, the policy that that is the most populistic, like saying, oh, we're going to send every gang member in prison is very much more populistic than saying we're going to give some money to the poorest people, or we're going to ask for international aid. This is why we haven't been doing it, because we're doing the easiest thing. But once again, even if this is the case on your side, it still doesn't change, so they have proven. So like it's symmetric. So once again, go for the moral. But second argument, backlash from gangsters. Why does this happen? They're going to be more united and set their differences on the side to fight the government. On our side, they're incredibly ununited because they're their own worst enemy. Because they have territories that they're protecting from other gangs that also want to profit in those territories. At the point at which now the government is more dangerous than those other gangs, they're literally going to unite and fight the government. But secondly, they will buy more weapons and give higher bribes. Before, they were using it to trade drugs or as profit margin for the bosses and very little protection. Now, maybe less of the trades and better protected with more guns, with more weapons. They have a lot of money because drugs are just incredibly profitable. You can sell them everywhere. Third mechanism and impacts in our second speech, vote for us.
I would like to thank Speaker Marsh for his speech, and I would like to invite the second speaker for the government.
Right, firstly, just going to go through the bits that they attacked on us in terms of like capacity to do this. Secondly, in terms of, oh, but people have no alternatives if they're poor to join gangs, and why that just isn't true and is a tedious thing people roll out in debates, which is just not real life. And also, thirdly, why the government has a greater principled obligation to protect the lives of its citizens than it does to protect human rights. Firstly, on capacity. The thing that they give us there in terms of, oh, there are other ways that you'll be able to get support, like international support, like money. This is exactly how you get international support. MS-13 originates in El Salvador. It is a massive problem that America has and most other South American countries have in terms of the drug trade. At the point at which you can kill it at the root, this is the most economically efficient way that the governments are able to do this. Given that El Salvador is a relatively small country, this is a way in which they're able to, one, signal that they are very capable and willing to do this, and so are able to get more buy-in, and two, like literally just are able to get more money because this is seen as doing it more so than like comparatively in a world in which you have maybe issues like corruption, etc., which you're showing don't exist to the same extent. So this is actually the way at which you get their mechanism the most efficiently, because this is the way to target policy that other countries care about in getting that. So I think that's an economic win for us. Then they give us the idea that gangs will be motivated, so then there won't be efficacy in this. I think the police and the military will be more motivated to do this ever. The reason for this is that I think people are to some degree idealist. I think at the point at which in the status quo, and that there is like, oh, you know, this is just how things are, there is a structural problem with gangs, and a president has come along and said, this is the massive push. We're going to do every single effort that we can to do this. People are suddenly hugely motivated. This looks like things like being less willing to take bribes because you actually believe that this could be the change that does it, rather than just going along in the status quo, because there is more political pressure. Because, by the way, like another element of this mechanism of dealing with gangs is being much harder on corruption in the police. So I think at that point then, people are going to work harder, do less corruption. At that point then, you just become far more effective. Thirdly, on signalling. I don't know if any of you have seen the pictures of what these jails look like, but they are absolutely terrifying. Like, they've gone out of their way to show how absolutely brutal these jails are for people. I think this segues into the recruitment thing. The idea they give us on people have no alternatives at all. I would just say to this, if that's true all the time, then why aren't gangs such a big problem in every poor country in the world as they are in El Salvador, the ones with the largest gang problem in the world? Because it isn't true in many of the other countries comparatively poor. The reason for that is people do have alternatives. The way that you're able to do this is firstly in terms of like showing that there is like that gang life is relatively appealing to people. At the point at which there is a huge PR push, at the point at which this is so visible that we are doing a debate about this, then people actually see where this goes. These images in terms of the brutality in the prisons, the fact that they're willing to suspend human rights, has a signaling effect even for young people, where they see actually, yeah, this maybe isn't worth the trade-off. Maybe there is some risk to my physical safety, but you know, I'm probably willing to deal with that to be able to get this. I think also at the point at which you literally have less people in the streets and you have other things going on, like having to deal with the fact that you're constantly being hounded down by the police and the military, you're literally less able to recruit because it's not your priority. Secondly, on the pressure and risk of violence, I think the alternative for most people in poor areas is actually just joining the police or the military. The reason for this is they're the only organization that's able to give you protection from these gangs, because they don't kill people in the police and the military, because they know that like they and everyone that they know will be killed if they do this, because they do pretty brutal retribution in these countries for doing that. So at that point then, these people, because they're literally hiring, there's a massive increase in money and incentive towards this. You can just, if you don't want to join a gang, have a far greater ability to fight the gang. And also seeing the analysis about how this is a kind of idealistic time for people is probably something that's quite appealing. Thirdly, at the point at which gangs are being hounded down and have less efforts to do the other things they do, the judiciary works better in your country because there is less corruption, because they don't have the time to be able to do things like put pressure on witnesses. At that point then, you know, you are actually able to do things like put people into jail, put pressure on them. Also, and lastly, and this is maybe like, I don't know, questionable ethically, but like, you know, at the point at which streets are emptied of gang members, hundreds and thousands of gang members going on, these are people that can no longer have children because they're in all-male prisons. And at that point, then that cycle is then reduced. And then, yeah, on the principal point here, the social contract, sure. The way the social contract works is you have a monopoly of violence and the state protects your rights. But the social contract is reciprocal and you agree to, do what the state says is the law in your countries. At the point at which you're in a gang, you do not do that. You're willing to do another institution which promises the monopoly of violence for you. You're effectively forgoing all of the rights that you have to the state at that point at which you become oppositional to the state. Compare that to all the people that are being killed, have much worse lives in El Salvador because of this. The state, as part of the social contract, promises to protect your life. At the point at which there are areas in El Salvador where there is like literally police no-go zones, where there is so much witness intimidation, you know, that people can act completely with impunity, the state is unable to do that. At the point at which you or a family member, a friend, can literally be murdered with no impunity, the state cannot protect your right. This is the most important right, because life is just like the thing that you need to be able to get any other rights. At the point at which you are not able to like actually fulfill that right, you're unable to fulfill any other rights for people that do consent into the social contract. That is more principally important for a state to fulfill. Also, yeah, I also think importantly, there's no acts and omissions distinction, like philosophically. That is to say, the state's doing or not doing something is not really any meaningful difference to anyone's lives. So proactively doing something or just not letting something happen is in both instances either a violation or a fulfillment of the social contract. So there is no meaningful difference there. At that point then, also given that these people are literally just innocent people, and I probably just like on a, generic, unprincipled metric, willing to prioritize them over people that are like more violent people willing to do bad things. Impacting this then, Firstly, in intensity, the most vulnerable people who we have the most obligations to protect are being protected. Yeah, I'll take the COPOI.
Yes. Do you agree that most of this policing is going to happen in specific neighborhoods where the gun violence is high?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening across the entire country, but yes, sure. Anyway, yeah, this is literally the most vulnerable people. This is like, women and children in incredibly poor areas that are just able to get slightly better lives, that the risk at which they are going to die massively decreases. Secondly, in terms of scale, I just think this is relatively obvious, but there are more people outside of gangs than there are inside gangs at the point at which they're able to get that benefit. That is a nice win for just that. In terms of the long term, there's like an obvious positive change at the point at which this is a relatively short-term measure. It's been incredibly explicit that this is a short-term measure. I think what that means then is you're able to do this, structurally decrease the power that gangs have, and then go back to things like human rights. Because people do like human rights, but they really fucking hate gangs. They're willing to do this for a few years to be able to get the longer-term benefits, which is a win. Short-term, and I think this is really important. This is very popular because it's offering people hope in a country that is very difficult to live in. It is very, very violent, and economic prospects are relatively poor in El Salvador. At the point at which someone is saying, I'm actually willing to do something to make change, even if the change doesn't happen, which I think all the analysis says it does, people are just happy in the short term that someone is willing to do something which is actually able to do that for them. I think that makes people far, far happier. I think it makes their lives in the short term better. Obviously, all of these reasons proposed.
I'd like to thank you very much for your speech, and I'd like to invite the second speaker for the opposition.
Okay, am I visible, audible? Okay. 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 Okay, 3, 2, 1. Dear panel, please notice, gangs are not Genghis Khan in the Middle Ages. They don't just kill people everywhere in the world just because they want to, just because they're evil people. No, we have given you the reasons why people join gangs, because they have no alternative. But also notice that gangs don't have the incentive to attack people that often. And I will actually start with this. Why is it the case? First thing, attacking civilians means that there will be trouble with the police. You knifing a person in the street for no reasons means that your gang boss is going to have problems with the local police, which means that you have no incentive and you get backlash from your boss. But second thing is that you literally use resources for nothing. You just kill people, you just waste time doing this instead of just investing in your drug plantations and things like that. But also, the third, we have given you in our second argument 2 reasons why they don't attack civilians, but also they are more likely to attack civilians now because they want to show the government that this policy won't lead to less violence, but actually lead to more violence, which means that it is in their incentive to just become more radical so that the government now is more likely to actually overturn this measure because it leads to worse effects. Yes, and also we are more likely to have gangs uniting with each other since they have now the common enemy. They're likely to actually have someone to fight other than themselves. So what are the impacts of this? The impacts of this is that the gangs have the incentive to invest into weapons instead of drugs. They have now the incentive to actually fight not each other but the government, and have the incentive to attack civilians, which leads to actually more people dying, and the problem, which is not that severe on the side of proposition, becoming much bigger. And that's why we actually have more people dying. But okay, I will continue with some direct rebuttals. First, in the OG, their whole mechanism is that, okay, you do crack down, there will be now less gangs in the world. Why is it not the case? Because first thing is that it doesn't affect the root of the issue. Vayo has already explained to you that people go there for social needs. They respond to it. Because they're poor neighborhoods in other countries as well. But please notice that, for example, in the USA, you still have gangs, but also the economy is much different in those poor neighborhoods. You have in the West, you have actual infrastructure, you have actual jobs and stuff like that in those countries. So they have the ability to actually not go to gangs, and they also have welfare and stuff like that. But okay, also the second thing, which means that and why doesn't their mechanism scare people away? Two reasons why. First thing, they see themselves as sacrificing themselves for the family, which are the people they care most about. But second thing is that people are short-termistic. They're likely to just choose now that they will live a better life than potentially after 10 years going to prison. The bottom line of this is that people will still join gangs on both sides of the house. The second thing is that those gangs can never be eradicated. Why? First reason, guerrilla warfare. Why wasn't the USA able to get rid of the Vietnamese communists? Because of the jungle. Because El Salvador is one huge jungle, which means that those gangs can literally escape to those places, which they can hide there. It is easy to defend there, and even they can go freely to other countries in the region because the borders are not that protected, which means that they can escape. But second thing is that you have cities with huge hoods, which are also places where they can easily hide in. And the third thing is from the first point is that you get more and more people to join. So the bottom line of this is that you still have gangs. And when you combine with the first point that you have people still joining, it means that you are literally unable to fight it with crackdown. And the alternative that we bring you is the better, which is that that people continuously that we support social policies and get international aid. Other things that we get from them is that about the social contract. Well, dear panel, please notice that we still give rights to criminals because we have taken into consideration that they are still humans, but also those policies affect people who are not in the gangs. We affect because the government has now emergency power and it takes the rights of assembly of overall people who are not in the gangs and haven't done anything that bad. Yes, PY.
So where do you think people are more likely to have jobs that aren't being gang members? On your side of the house, where the gangs are strong, or on our side of the house?
On our side of the house, because instead of building prisons which cost billions of dollars, we can just invest into welfare, and instead of wasting money on the military, we invest into neighborhoods and investments. So that's why. Okay, I will continue with some weighing. Why do we beat them? First thing, we beat them on their own metric, where do gangs kill less people? On our side of the house, when they're not that radical, when they just grow their drugs and stuff like that, and occasionally fight people instead of just actively uniting against the country on the other side. But also, even if you don't buy into this, we still have our huge moral point. Why is this huge moral point important? It means because it's 100% true. That's why, for example, people do the Roee problem, which is you wouldn't push a fat person to save 5 people from a Roee because you care about morals. And that's why ultimately we win this debate on first thing, their own metric. But even if you don't buy it, we have the moral which pushes us and is 100% true to get us over them in this debate. So please vote for us.
I would like to thank you very much for the speech. And now I would like to invite the third speaker for the government.
What was missing in this debate is a systematic explanation as to how we can actually eradicate gangs as much as possible. We can understand that more force doesn't mean no gangs, but rather we need to explain specifically how this change is the tipping point to eradicate most of the gangs in Salvador, and that is what we're going to do. Before that, some points of rebuttal. They tell us, but now gangs will be more violent because people are pushing against them. That is the logic against every anti-gang action whatsoever, because gangs will be violent because they don't like people pushing against it. Secondly, as gangs kills more civilians, there is more incentive of civilians to go against it. There is more pressure against the gangs. There are more people willing to actually fight their lives against the gangs. There are more people willing to go against the gang, even if they were gang members, because they knew someone from the neighborhood, then again killed, and go to the police and talk about it. So we think this is not incentive again, and if that happens, that it's good to actually do that in the long term. Then they tell us, you can't stop gangs because jungle. Look, we think that the El Salvadorian army knows that they have a jungle in their country. I hope their intelligence tells them that. I think they are trained exactly in those things. Then they tell us, but the gang leaders will go to other countries. We think this is great. We think that the ability of leaders to control from afar what actually happens in El Salvador is far worse. So it will, first, worse operations. Secondly, they will likely move to other countries, most of the operations, thus less crime in El Salvador. Then they tell us, but now we invest in military, not in welfare. Firstly, no obsession whatsoever right today we invest in welfare. Secondly, welfare doesn't make you actually have a job in the long term, it's a short-term solution. Thirdly, look, when we pay to the military, we mean we employ more people in general, which will give them wages and livable wages to live in dignity, which we think is generally good, which we think is also a good benefit for our side. Let's move and understand why it's better on our side. Specifically, we claim that the only way to actually eradicate gangs is specifically chopping their head off. Let's understand why we can do that only on our side of the house. Firstly, today what happens is that people don't get direct command from the gang leaders, but rather from very many people in the inter. So we don't know and can't indict the person on the top. Today, firstly, we have more money to pay people to tell for them to work for us. Secondly, we have actual ability to tap into their phones, because many times they use encrypted phones, things like that. But today, when we have advanced technology like NSO and things like that happen only on our side, advanced technologies, we can actually listen to their conversations, which even if we don't know what they do, we have their phones, so we can indict them specifically. Thirdly, we think that many times the gang leaders are doing corruption against politicians and policemen, etc. Now, when you have both the DEA that is likely to work only when there is cooperation from the state, when you have the police and the military, it is simply very hard to corrupt all of them together in order to do that. So it's very that one of them, when he sees you, is actually going to do something against you. Moreover, it's very likely that the military will actually monitor the police for illegal transactions, so it's easier to spot that corruption, easier to do. Fourthly, many times people just fear today of saying and reporting, I saw that gang leader there, but on our side, we have better witness protection because we have more money which we can give, and the military itself can protect people in witness protection, which we didn't have before. There was also the corrupt police. All in all, that means that we're just much more likely to find these gang leaders. Why is that so crucial? Firstly, many times they are almost the only ones that know all the operation of the gang because they don't want to be betrayed, etc. So it means that where they get the drugs and how from different cartels. So it's when they don't have that, it's harder to do all the operations. Secondly, many times other cartels only believe them, because notice that the function of crime means that there is no much belief in each other because they kill each other all the time. So you believe that specifically that person. But if you have another person, you're less likely to believe and actually do business with him. Many times it's about the personal contact that you have. Many times, thirdly, many times they want to employ not so smart people, so they won't be overthrown. So there isn't another one to actually function. Thirdly, because they are smart, they're the ones thinking about new smuggle techniques, new ways to avoid police, etc. So when they're not on. Lastly, when they're actually not there, there is no incentive for the other one to step in because he knows that the one before was killed. Lastly, they have a generous image. If you think about Sinaloa cartel, you think about its head. When people don't hear about its head and they know it's in prison, they're less likely to pay protection. They're less likely to be proud of their gang and go to the gang, etc. All in all, that means much less violence, all in all, much less gangs that are able to operate so cleverly. When you don't operate cleverly, it's more easier to catch you in simple schemes that you do and are already known to police and military. All in all, less drugs, less gangs, and less people with incentive to go to gangs because it's no longer being proud of the gang because its leaders were already in prison, nobody knows who they are, they were humiliated. Before I move on,
Okay, but gang leaders know about all these measures that are being taken, so they just get another leader. They will consistently move locations. They will live in a bunker. They have the ability to take countermeasures because these measures are public.
Yes, thank you. Look, if they do all these measures, they need to live in a bunker and don't see almost anyone. That means the gang is actually infunctionable. You cannot actually operate it because you know, and all of these things systematically cannot actually work. When you, even if you know it, within many times they don't know that they can penetrate your phone. They don't know who they can trust and who they cannot trust, and this fear means. Secondly, why we just have better human rights on our side? First, you think that today, when you don't have intelligence, we don't have cooperation with the United States, etc., because they don't trust you and think that you are corrupt many times, they trust only your military, which isn't part of the drug before that. So what happens is that you need to interrogate a lot of people for everything that you have. You need them using torture, police violence, etc., because they're so desperate to find someone. On our side, we don't need to interrogate so much because we have the advanced intelligence, because we have satellites. All of these things mean that there is less police violence against the people. Secondly, we think that why there won't be abuse. Let's give you systematic reasons why there won't be abuse from the state. Firstly, these are military people who go from place to place. They aren't connected to the specific neighborhood, so you don't know the specific people or can't be pressured because their family also lives in the neighborhood like a policeman. Secondly, we think that many of the tools that the state gets, like for example, intelligence, etc., are coming from the United States and other Western countries, which can sanction it if they see too much abuse and have incentive to do that. Firstly, by not giving the tools at the first place. Secondly, sanction economically when they see, for example, disuse and abuse of the tools that they've given them against civilians. Lastly, there is incentive to actually cooperate with the citizens in order to get more information about the gangs. They are the ones that can actually provide that, and it only happens if you actually believe and the people believe in you and don't see you as a traitor. Lastly, we think that there is an economical benefit to all of this. Why? Because people from the outside see now that there is a crackdown. They see that the DA is involved, and also the DA can help them and cooperate with them when they open new factories there to build textile and things like that. So we think that the inability of combating unemployment, all of these things, we are much better off, and actually an ability to give long-term employment to people and also prevent gun ownership this way. I call you to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for his speech, and I'd like to invite the third speaker for the opposition.
Second. When we're asking ourselves what is an effective way to stop criminal activity, we have to ask ourselves not what stop the current like gangs, but what actually stop them from being forming. We think that OO try to play on this idea of people still being poor, but I think they got really sufficient answers from OG, and we think the actual reasons why people are getting into criminal behavior is when they are educated that this is okay, when they live in a place where the like leaders and the people which are being glorified are the actual criminals, and this actually what created the situation in El Salvador. In my speech, I'm going to first of all explain why this policy is going has made a lot of minority and poor people really miserable and made them which is bad by itself. But we think that rather than that, I'm going to explain why it actually made them like those places to hate so much the police, to lose any trust, and to actually create a major backlash that actually glorified that will actually just glorify the like those gangs. So quick rebuttals to CG. First of all, we think that most of the solution that they are showing of like, I don't know, catching the head of the gang or using phones or whatever are very, very temporary. Like as Both of our teams are from Israel. Both we are used like those exact types of technique to fight against terror. We think it takes a really short time until like the gangs understand that you are following their phone and stop using their phone, but using a VPN. And if not a VPN, they will use like literal like message on I don't know, like a paper or something. There are many solutions. When one had fallen, another person just replace him. Secondly, we think that most of the solutions they have to protect are not the smart ones that they actually trying to say. Most of them are just the army going again and again to some neighborhood, trying to catch evidence, even though he's not that good, like it is not an efficient body for that, and just creating a major amount of backlash and hate. Okay, so let's get to my point. First of all, some important framing. We think that most of this policies include include stuff that is just which just really hurt usually poor people which live in the poorest neighborhood in those places without knowing that in detail the situation in El Salvador. Usually they would be, if they're not from like a different literal like minority, they might be from a specific have a specific family name, or people which are definitely associated with this type of crime. We think that in order to actually bring so much policies in such short time, we think that the prime minister have to create some amount of hatred against them. He have to publicly explain why they are so bad that we need to do anything in order to hurt them. We think that just by that, we think that there's always already a major amount of hatred among all population to this areas of crime. Secondly, we think that why we think that all minority is going to be hurt? First of all, really because they're all being targeted. Secondly, at the moment that you bring army or something like that, or recruit policemen really fast, you recruit people which are not used to actually protect human rights and think of their job of doing the minimal amount of harm and assuming that every person is innocent until otherwise is proven. We think this means that we are going to see that we're going to see people which are getting into houses with with no burden of proof of a warrant or something like that. We believe that this type of policy means that you're going to search in people's house and I don't know, wake all of his kids and all of the little community around this place. You're going to hurt the privacy of people by looking at their phone and blackmailing them for stuff that exists there. We think this is a major damage, first of all, because it scares a lot of people. We think that in this place, they have no one to actually call to protect them because the government is actually the person who hurt them so badly. We think it hurts their little, most basic rights, such as privacy, such as security, such as having a decent process of judging in the country. But we think that the reason it's even worse, it doesn't hurt only them, it actually forced them to radicalize those areas. Why? Because we think that at the moment that this happens, we think that everyone on those neighborhoods that used to have already a lot of crime now actually will start to really hate the army and the police. We think that it automatically makes you have zero trust on them. It means that when on the next time that they come in, you know that there are people which are not protecting you. They have no problem with riding your neighborhood to finding some evidence or something like that. They have no problem with putting someone that might be guilty. That I don't know that they suspected that did some criminal activity. They have no problem with with giving him extremely big punishment, whatever. Before I continue, CG.
We've already analyzed you, why specifically the military is the incentive for the people to cooperate with them in order to get the evidence that they so crucially need. So that is why the commanders will tell what to do and what not to do in order to actually combat crime, which is what they came
we think that first of all, the army doesn't have the abilities in order to actually do that effectively. The army is being trained to actually to literally be in wars. We think that those people have not been actually trained in order to protect like in order to minimize the damage they do to population, etc. We think that usually those poor people, like they're going to be a huge backlash on each of those policies in the motion, on the fact that they cannot actually protest anymore because they don't have right for assembly, but the fact that they saw their neighbors being sent to jail for extremely long time, stuff like that. We think this is exactly what makes new people to get into crime. We think that you cannot solve gangs just by like beating them harder. We think that what you should actually do is just try to not make gang be formed from begin with, and people not to choose the criminal life. We think that by making such a big hatred over the country, you just create those from all of those reasons.
I'd like to speak up my first speech, and I'd like to invite the last speaker for the government.
Can you hear me? Cool. Sorry, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two main clashes in this debate. Why is it more likely for us to lower crime rates in those places? Second one is why we have more protection over human rights. Before that, just one point of extremeness about it, the rest will be integrated. Notice we heard from opening opposition that, look, we're going to have more workplaces because the government is going to invest that money instead of building more prisons, for example, in workplaces. 3 answers to that. Notice, but Bakar just started that with 2019, right? Before that, we had a lot of opportunity to use that money specifically in creating more workplaces. We haven't seen that in El Salvador, and they actually give you no incentive or no analysis regarding the incentives why they're going to do that in the counterfaction. Just assume that. Secondly, notice that they never actually proved to why they have the same capital, right? Maybe people prioritize fighting war with gangs over getting more jobs because of that. Bakar got elected from the get-go. They never analyzed why they're going to have the same capital. And thirdly, no analysis towards why, even if they're going to put that money in investing those workplaces, why is it going to work? Notice that OO's analysis says that gangs actually take over everything. They actually threat people to take their money, to take their jobs. So even if there are going to be more jobs, considering that gangs are still going to be there, I'm truly not sure why it's going to work. First, it's more likely for us to lower crime rates, because opening government says starts by explaining why is it going to be more beneficial from what we did until now, because we have more resources, we have more time, we prioritize it when we compare it to what we did before. Opening position says, look, even if you're going to have all of those resources and time, once you're going to arrest people, other people will just replace them, right? Because we're talking about the lower rank gang members. So they're just replaceable, it's going to keep on going, and gangs are going to keep on existing. I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to give extraneous points of rebuttal to what we just heard from OO, and then I'm going to explain our case. Extraneous points of rebuttal. Notice that it's easier to actually know who recruits all those lower gang members right now, right? My partner explains you that once we can actually take phones, once we have satellites that can actually do that, it's easier for us to say that, look, we can actually identify who's the one recruiting, and therefore we can actually stop the chain. But furthermore, my partner actually gives you an entire case explaining exactly why, even if that answers opening opposition, right? Because even if the lower rank people are more replaceable, we have the head of the gangs that are not that replaceable, right? In a POI, they try to say to my partner, no, but we're just going to replace a head gang. I don't know, have you watched Breaking Bad? It's not that fucking easy just having replaced the head of the gang, right? Notice that it's going to create war. They most of the time don't even have somebody that's going to replace them because they're afraid that somebody is going to kill them, and therefore it's not that easy to just find a replacement for them. Notice that if we take them down, all of the lower ranks don't know what to do, meaning it's more time for the police to actually identify all of the middle class gang members. Therefore, it's going to be easier for us. But notice that we're not talking about just short term, because once we take off the head of the gang, meaning it's more time and more resources for the authorities to actually track down all of the things that they did and replace them and put them in jail and for a longer time, and it's going to be a lot harder to replace them. Why this is crucial, panel? Because it's very weird that I have to say that, but opening opposition try to claim that gang members don't hurt civilians. This is crucial, panel. Notice that they have casualties when they have gang shooting at each other, even if they don't hurt them physically. The fact that there's a lot of drugs means that it's not safe for my kids to walk on street. The fact that there's a lot of drugs means that the other economy doesn't actually develop in those things. They don't have to actually torture them in order to hurt minorities. And this is crucial, panel, because we think that El Salvador, what they need when they're now semi-democratic state, is to being able to actually have their rights being watched and their ability to actually live their life. We think that this is enough for us to win this debate. But let's also win while we protect more human rights. Oh, but before I just do that, extremist part of rebuttal, because we heard from CO that no, it's not going to be, we're not going to be able to catch all of the head of the gangs, and they try to compare it to fucking Israel. What a ridiculous thing, right? Hamas and Hezbollah is outside of fucking Israel. It's not like gangs within your neighborhood. And secondly, you know what? We didn't try the same tactics on Hezbollah and Hamas like we did right now. I'm not going to further explain. If you know. Second one, we notice that now we're going to have a lot more resources. Now we can track the phones of the heads. We can have satellites and we can know where the car is going. It's going to be a lot harder for them to actually hide, even if we try to compare it to Nasrallah in Hezbollah. Let's continue to more human rights, because this opening position says they explain why the government is now going to have the ability to abuse the tools that they were giving. Now they won't be able for the citizens to assemble, and now the government is going to use more money and weapons that they do. The problem with the case given for opening opposition, that even if you believe that the government is going to have the ability to do that, they never actually explain if the government is going to have the incentive to do all of those things. This is exactly where my partner explains to you why now there's going to be less abuse with these tools. My partner explains to you like 3 different things, right? Not just the public pressure that opening governments try to mention. My partner explains to you why there's more regulation from outside of the country. The fact that you use technologies that the United States and other Western countries are using means that you have more regulation. The fact that now even people from within the country that want for the good of the country now has more ability to use that. This is crucial, because this is also prioritized our case above opening opposition, because they say, look, it's principally just because the government needs to protect the rights of the citizen. But only when my partner explains to you why it's likely for the government to protect the rights of the civilian people, then the case coming for opening opposition stands. This is why we are above OO, but also above OG, but also above OO, because we extended the country doesn't have, the government doesn't have the incentive to actually use, and therefore we don't have the minorities right. Before I continue and answer also why we got what we got from CG, I will take opening. Yes.
They will find the replacement leader in advance because they will be pressured by higher members to do this, so your case doesn't happen
No. They're not going to find a replacement from above, because that replacement could just kill them at any given point, and they're afraid to be doing that, so therefore they don't do it in the status quo, but they won't do it tomorrow. I already explained that. Oh, but CG says, look, but the army is not used to protect civilians, and therefore they're going to get into civilians' homes and so on and so on. Hey, notice we can just brief them not to do that. Secondly, if the army and civilians from that country, they don't want people entering their mother's house, I'm pretty sure they're not going to do it as well. And thirdly, notice that my partner already explains to you what happened, and this is the third case that my partner explains to you. We need to compare the tools that we're going to have right now to the tools we had before. If before I needed to actually enter each and every one houses in a neighborhood in order to actually investigate who is involved and what happened, now using technology I need to do it less. I can just actually track down only the people that were involved because they're in the WhatsApp or Telegram group, for example, and this is how we protect more human rights, because I don't need to go door by door, and I can just identify from the get-go who are the people that I actually need to do the privilege. Because we give people more the opportunity to live in a democratic state with all of the rights, and because we lower the crime rate in those areas, you have to support the motion.
I would like to thank the speaker very much for a speech, and I would like to invite the last speaker for the opposition.
Am I audible? Right. 3, 2, 1. Listen, we're winning this debate by a very simple reason. We're winning this debate because Roee came up to you and analyzed why it's going to be excessive violence in those poor and probably minority neighborhoods, even when those people haven't done anything wrong. We think already here, and especially considering the fact we got zero rebuttal to this claim, we already win this debate. There are 3 main clashes in this debate. First, is it legitimate for the country? Is it moral for the country to do this? The second is where we harm the minorities and the poorest class. And third is it actually going to be effective? I'm going to show you why the minorities is the most important. But first of all, let's answer both governments a little. Come to us, both of the governments, and they say, oh, wait, but the military is so much less corrupt than the police. In OG, they say it's because the police have less contact those gang members, and we think it's simply absurd considering OG themselves are saying, let's put them on the street in direct contact with the gang members, so we do not understand them here. But here comes CG, and it says, oh wait, but the police has an interest to do what's best to the gang. First of all, please notice that yes, they have an incentive to do what seems as good, but it's much easier to put in jail the gang member who stole something than to put in jail the gang member who killed someone. Why? First of all, it's easier to catch him. Second of all, it's less dangerous for you, and then you can make a big tararama of it and say, listen, put him to 10 years in prison. The thing on both sides, the people they're going to be managing are not going to be the people, the leaders they want. Second, especially those high leaders are still can get into the army. They need to bribe only one person, only one person. We got no clue why army officers are going to take less bribe than policemen. We think specifically considering to high authority figures in these guys, governments do not have a case. But let's continue on the head of the gang, and here we clash directly with Roee. If we accept that with their high intelligence and army and they're not given right to assemble, they have a way to stop the head of the gang, they simply do not have an incentive. Why? Because as OG agrees with us, this is what makes him popular. The fact that he's fighting the crime, the fact that he's having and this is exactly what we explained to, the fact that he is the president who's fighting the against, who fights the leaders. This means that he have a continuing incentive to keep some crime in his country in order to get chosen again and again and to keep his power. Why? Because OG himself said that in the second it's going to be reduced significantly, he will have to waive over all of his authorities and all of the power he's got, which means that the president actively have an interest to not catch the leaders, to keep against, and sometimes catch one leader in order to show them less violence. Great. Why the poor people are the most important thing in this country? First of all, relatively to the moral clash, we think that those are the people that are getting most hurt by the country. They get the least funds. They already have less access to job. They already have less access than the immigrants. So if you're asking morally, they're the most important person. But moreover, we think that when you live in a worse area, your chance to not going to again, your chance to not going to get out of property is much less, and when you're helping them, we have much more delta. Before I continue into explain how Roee won this clash, opening, do you have something for me?
Yeah, most of the stuff that you're talking about there is broadly symmetric. The actual comparative difference for the most vulnerable people in society is their ability to be free from gangs, the thing that is most oppressive and harmful to them.
Okay, I understand. We actually asked you why, by your analysis, the president have no incentive. Why do we win this clash? What Roee brings you in the clash? He specifically explained to you why. First, in order to bring those policies that specifically say, I waive my human rights, he has to create hatred toward a specific community, as you agree that it mostly the pure and some ethnic. What does it mean? It means that already here, he made them an enemy. He has an excuse to give them less budget. He has an excuse to help them less because here he's becoming more popular. But moreover, what Roee gives you here is the army is less trained in communicating with the civilians. The army is much more trained into using force. They're regular to be in danger. There is a much higher chance they're going to use violence. What does it mean that I, as a child, see my mom go to prison for 50 years, dragged by some crazy argument, and the chance that after that I'm going to trust the government, I'm going to find a good job is simply inexistent. What is the impact you get here? You get people who might have trusted the government, who might have got a good job, averted from it completely. You get more poor people. And you get a gang cycle, because when you do not say anything, because when you're afraid to call the police, the chance you're going to get is much higher, so you get more violence on our side. All these reasons